Well, and that's a good segue into this, and we are going to get into what you do in your offices individually when that specialty case comes about, when you decide to go into multifocals, how you handle the patient, and the way we're talking about multiple visits and whatever you do. We want to get into that so that our colleagues understand a little bit more too about what we do, and then they can decide. But speaking directly to our colleagues, we obviously are in agreement that monovision maybe ought to be a thing of the past and go away. But really, why do you think it isn't? Why do you think it's still the most prevalent form of correction out there when it comes to presbyopic use? And don't you think that all doctors today should be using multifocals versus monovision?
Absolutely, John. The way that things have always gone is what I know I'm going to stick with. And if it's going to take me a little bit of time to learn about something new, I may not want to put the time in. And I think that may be a perception by a fair number of people who are still fitting monovision. And let's be honest, I mean, if a person is emerging into presbyopia and they're in their early 40s, monovision's not that difficult to fit. And so for a lot of the doctors out there, they just feel that this is an easy transition. But looking forward beyond the early emerging years of presbyopia, monovision becomes a lot more problematic, it becomes a lot more difficult, it becomes much more bothersome visually to our patients. And so looking forward into those additional years, putting that little bit of work in the early components of when a patient is emerging or just developing into presbyopia, I think we can make a huge impact on them in the long term. I think that's why we may be still seeing a lot of presbyopia out there. And again, let's be honest, it's a bit more difficult to fit a monovision patient that has been established and relatively, maybe even they're having a little bit of some problems into multifocals, because we kind of have to reset their whole visual system than it is to just switch them right over to multifocals. So it may be the work that needs to go into it that a lot of practitioners aren't ready to do that. And that's unfortunate.
I think that gets back to what Jack was saying before. I think there's definitely a difference between easy and comfortable.
Right.
I'm very comfortable fitting multifocals. I'm not going to say that it's an easy fit, but I feel comfortable doing it.
Absolutely.
And
that comes with time. That comes with doing it.
It comes with experience.
Right. And I think there's a trap. And Dave, you alluded to it perfectly, and somewhat inertia is you have that patient who comes in 41, 42, let's say they're in a minus 575 and they're starting to have reading. Well, okay, we can put them in a 550. One lens, we can move it into a 550, maybe a 5 1/4, just so they can pick up a little reading right now. It's easy, it really didn't affect their distance vision all that much. Next time they come in, well, okay, we can just dial it back. Then before you know it, they have a diopter and a half splay between the two eyes, and you put them in monovision. They're in monovision. And you're right, you go to make that switch, and it's a much harder switch than if at the day that they were emerging at 42, 43, you said, okay, look, I think it's time for us to make a change here. Go whole hog, fit with a multifocal lens, fit with a low ad or something that gives them what they need, rather than just shirking your responsibility to the patient and saying, well, if I just undercorrect a little bit, they'll be fine for this year, they'll be fine for next year, because you find yourself 7, 8 years down the road having to do a much harder transition.
To do.
Well,
so that's my...
The problem with monovision really is once you get up to that 1.5 diopter difference between the two eyes, is what's the patient going to come back and complain about? They're going to complain that they don't have a third eye right in the middle of their forehead, because they're now going to lose that intermediate vision. You can give them the near, you can give them the distance, but they're going to lose that intermediate vision. And that's where you start snowballing into the extraordinary amount of time that it's going to take to give them back that comfortable intermediate vision. Where if you started them in the multifocals, over time, they never lose that intermediate vision.
But by the way, Jack's point, what you said initially here, and talking about evidence-based medicine, I mean, we all know that certainly on that emerging presbyope, you're not going to run into the intermediate issue right away. But you will run into the issue of, is this safe? Is it just as safe that way as it was having both eyes for distance and being able to have both seen near? Would you talk a little bit about that too in terms of an emerging presbyope? I mean, isn't it just as important?
When we look back at progressive lenses, or anything that happens in the dispensary, we don't have the same stigma of system when we give someone a progressive pair of glasses. And the patient doesn't seem to have a problem paying that extra money out of pocket outside of their insurance to get this thing that doesn't have an unsightly line that they don't want, even though their insurance covers it. But we seem to be, at least some practitioners seem to be reticent about saying the same thing in a multifocal contact lens. And I think that's where it comes from, is you're right, it's a system, but the same way that you would, have that patient pay a premium to not have that line on their glasses, you shouldn't be worried about them having to pay a premium to have a contact lens system that does everything for you.
That's where the comfort level comes in. And that's where I think we're starting to reach a critical mass right now, where people want it and it's expected, and it becomes less of a conversation because people understand that this is where I want to be and this is where I want to go. And that's exactly what happened with no-line bifocals. It became multifocals. It became standard of care. Well, of course you want a no-line. Why wouldn't you? And when patients say, I want to pay less because I want to have a line, your staff's reaction is almost like, that's terrible. Why would you possibly want the line? And I think that's where we need to be with multifocal contact lenses, where people, well, why wouldn't you want that?
Right, and
Don't
also,
you want what's best?
On the same token, we all have that one patient who's still in multifocal, or I'm sorry, in monovision, who will say to us, can't you make a pair of glasses that does this? Sure. And we all roll back the same way, like, who would ever do that in a pair of glasses? But yet we do it in contact lenses all the time. It's the same basic idea. It's like there's a better way of solving this.
Mm-hmm. But do you have price? Because you're in a private practice. Do you have price?
Yeah, price is definitely an issue. And what we're talking about with our technicians and our team, everybody just rears back whenever they hear a patient say, I want monovision, or I'm in monovision. And it goes along with what you're saying, that we just have this assumptive selling, that this is the way that we do things in our office. Like, it's not the right way to go. It's not something we do. We don't do monovision, or we move you into something that's healthier, better, and better for your vision. And because that's our philosophy in our practice, eventually the patients, over time, move in the direction of doing what's a little bit more expensive or a little bit more valuable. And that's where we try to bring it up. And I know, Jack, you're great at that, of discussing value with patients and discussing with the patient. You're getting so much more for what you're paying for here with the multifocal lenses. And we certainly do bring it up and discuss it with our patients. Our multifocal fitting charges are quite a bit more. And what we've also done is, if a patient is persistent that they want monovision, they pay the same. They pay the same as if they do multifocals. And obviously the lenses are going to have a difference in the cost, but we tell them the value and the benefit of the lenses, and many of them are able to back off on the concerns that they have for finances.
So now I'm glad you're saying, but I think price is definitely, and in our practice, doctors don't initiate the fee discussion. No. And maybe we'll talk about this later.
We will.
Okay, we'll go to the so the safety issue.
Yeah.
As somebody, and this is I think one of you mentioned, Dave may have said this earlier, those are the people you want to go through this discussion. When they're young, they need a very small addition and again, monovision is so easy then, it's so hard to say, okay, especially to your staff, don't give that person a plus 50 or plus 75. Let's start them as an emerging presbyope. Because what happens, as Chris said, we're changing the visual system. We're changing the way they see. And they know that. They know that the same with the progressive glasses. They have to look down to see now. They understand that. So if we start with contacts exactly like we do with glasses, this is, I love that word, assumptive. This is we're assuming this is what you have to have if you're going to stay in the realm of high quality care. And so when you start young, it's so easy to put them in a multifocal.